This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, quite a positive day across the board today as easing lockdowns and hopes for more monetary stimulus gave investors confidence. Emerging market equities gained for a fourth straight session today. MSCI's index of emerging market shares rose about 1.3% on the day. It was bolstered by gains in Turkey and South Africa, as of course investors bet on a strong economic recovery while keeping a close eye on those Sino-US relations and of course protests going on in the US. In South Africa, the JSE was on track for its third day of gains. It climbed 1.45% on the day. Now, also coming up on today's show. Egypt set to end its lockdown despite a surge in coronavirus cases. Kenya's prospects of becoming an oil producer fade after failing to attract new investors. And Australia goes into a recession for the first time in 3 decades. Well, we begin this edition of Global Business Africa in Egypt, where the country is planning to resume normalcy during the second half of June. Now, on Sunday, the end of the curfew was moved from 6 a.m. to 5 a.m. The Coronavirus Crisis Management Group is due to consider the resumption of domestic flights in the second half of June or the first week of July. It is also expected to decide on the reopening of cafes, cinemas, restaurants, and sporting clubs. Egypt's cabinet spokesperson Nader Saad said that this move will help open up the tourism sector that of course has taken a huge blow due to the pandemic. The North African nation has seen a surge in the number of coronavirus infections in recent days. The number of cases has more than quadrupled in the last month. It jumped from 4,000 on the 24th of April to 18,000 on the 24th of May. Now on 1st June, almost 1,400 new cases were reported in the country. And heading to Kenya now, prospects of being an oil producer have dimmed, and that's following the completion of the early oil pilot scheme with no successor in sight. Now, in a press statement, joint venture partners Total and Africa Oil, Tullow Oil as well, confirmed that the scheme contract expired on June 2nd. As a pilot project, the scheme's objective was to provide critical technical data, logistical and operational experience, as well as training. The conclusion means that the national, county governments and the joint venture partners will now look into the results and steer the journey towards full field development. But with no investor interests, the project is bound to remain dormant. The early oil pilot scheme made a historic first export of crude oil from East Africa in 2019, raking in 200 million US dollars for Kenya. Meanwhile, Somalia has revoked the flight licenses of 2 Kenyan airlines. It has also banned them from flying into Somalia on the grounds of violating COVID-19 directives. The airlines, Buff Air Services and Silverstone Air Services, allegedly ferried loads of khat to Somalia while disguising them as medical supplies. Now, the loads arrived in the Somali towns of Buhodi and Jowar on the 26th of May and the 31st of May this year, respectively. The Somali federal government had banned the importation of khat from neighboring Kenya and Ethiopia, saying it contributes to the spread of the deadly COVID-19 disease. Now, business owners in Nigeria are set to enjoy a lower interest rate from banks following the central bank's reduction of the key monetary policy rates. The MPR was lowered to 12.5% from 13.5%. The move is in line with the Apex Bank's desire to cushion the country from the unprecedented economic strain, of course, triggered by the COVID-19 lockdown. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reporting.
Emmanuel Kyungnom is excited to be back in business after being shut down for nearly 3 months. His paint business has seen one of its worst downturns in 7 years, a loss of over $1,500 caused by the effect of a coronavirus outbreak. And it may take a while before it picks up again.
Since this pandemic started, the business has been down, has been low. First and foremost, there is no money. We have been experiencing low patronage.
Nigeria's central bank has made several interventions to ease monetary distress on businesses, from accelerating a $50 billion loan facility for small businesses. Now the latest move is the reduction of its monetary policy rate.
I think the low interest rates as CBN have announced, I think will help, especially like person like we, in order to put in more money into our business, to push the business to a greater height.
Although the monetary policy rate reduction will make lending cheaper and stimulate the economy, it might still not be enough to bring a meaningful recovery.
Well, it might not have immediate direct impact. I think authorities, particularly Monetary Policy Committee and Central Bank of Nigeria, we need to do more in terms of accelerating facility given to small businesses beyond the 50 billion naira. I think by now what Nigerian authorities should consider is an amount that is not less than 200 billion naira, approximately $500 million is what they need to impact the economy. Yes, it's significant, but the level of significance will not be much. It will save us to some extent, but we need to combine the reduction by 100 basis points, talking about 13.5 to 12.5. We need to combine that with fiscal policy, which will come, of course, from authorities other than Monetary Authority, with Monetary Policy Committee and Central Bank of Nigeria.
Nigeria's economy was making a slow recovery from the 2016 recession before the coronavirus outbreak. Now, inflationary pressure, a halt on international trade, and a decline in manufacturing is weakening the already fragile economy. Experts say increased demand and government spending can stimulate the economy and put it back on track. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, let's now shift focus to our corporate headlines for the day. In Kenya, low-cost carrier Jambojet is looking to fly more domestic and international routes. This is after filing a request with the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority. Now, in the filing, the budget airline is seeking to operate an additional hub at Mombasa's Moi International Airport, where it will operate 9 new local routes and 12 international routes. The airline started operating in 2014. It is a subsidiary of the national carrier Kenya Airways. And British firm Mediclinic International, which is the owner of a chain of private hospitals in Southern Africa, the Middle East and Switzerland, has reported a net loss of $394 million for the full year that ended on March 31st. The British company says its earnings from core business came in at $603 million. That's down 3% from the last fiscal year. And in South Africa, the average income of First National Bank customers plummeted by about 20% during the nation's lockdown. First Rand's retail banking unit also experienced a major drop-off in transactional activity as well as credit card spending. The lockdown in South Africa has hit almost all activities except essential services. The central bank sees the economy contracting by 7% in 2020. And finally, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries has completed the acquisition of Bombardier's CRJ series regional jet. The purchase cost Mitsubishi close to $550 million. However, this is subject to post-closing adjustments and the assumption of liabilities by MH1 related to credit and residual value guarantees and lease subsidies. Now, these amount to approximately $200 million. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a short break now, still to come on the show. Google faces a $5 billion class action suit for breaching the privacy of search engine users. And South Africa pumps $1.7 million to revive its ailing tourism sector.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan.
Hello, Naro.
This is how whole stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back. Now, the world's most popular web browser, Google, is facing a class action lawsuit in the U.S. The lawsuit, filed in California, seeks a minimum of $5 billion in damages. Now, Alphabet is accused of breaching the privacy of its millions of users, as well as violating U.S. federal and state privacy laws. The global giant allegedly broke the law by tracking their internet use, or rather tracking users' internet use, even when the browsers are in private mode. The argument is based on whether Google Chrome's incognito or other browsers' private browsing modes provide protection from tracking. Now, Google has denied those claims. It says the collection of search history, even in private viewing mode, helps site owners to better evaluate the performance of their content, products, and their marketing. Now, elsewhere, South Africa's tourism sector has received a further $1.7 million from the government. The sector has been hard hit by its closure amid the COVID-19 lockdown. While South Africa is now moving to reopen its economy, experts are saying it may still be a few months until tourism picks up. From Johannesburg, here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu reporting.
Certain areas of tourism in South Africa have reopened under Level 3 restrictions. Government has allocated additional funding to tourism guides to help them prepare.
We have set aside a total of 30 million rands, which will provide financial relief over a period of 2 to 3 months for the tourist guide. The opening up of hunting will also be a big boost to the tourism sector. The hunting industry contributes an estimated 2 billion direct spending annually to the tourism sector, and it also contributes to employment in the rural areas.
A full reopening of tourism in the country may only occur by September. Domestic flights have resumed, but only for those permitted to work and essential services.
The first phase of recovery for the sector will be driven by domestic tourism, followed by the regional tourism and international tourism. Although we will be gradually opening up the sector in the coming months, depending on how the virus is spread, we expect that the sector will only fully recover towards the end of this year.
Tourism was only supposed to open on level 1 and level 2. And for us to get some few aspects to open up on level 3, it's a positive. This helps us to build confidence, for the region and also for the international markets to see that we are ready.
Business travel is a significant contributor to the economy.
Opening up the sector further has other implications on other parts of the economy. When you open up leisure, you must also open up inter-provincial travel, right? And so that becomes key. And that's not a tourism thing, but it's a country thing about inter-provincial travel.
You can have multiple things happening at the same time to help the industry to recover. International tourists are quite important. They contribute 120 billion rand, in terms of the spend. So it's a quite important part of our sector, and we'll love to see that returning. and we know that is going to be competitive.
Government set aside $3,000 each for SMMEs in the tourism sector to help them get through the crisis. It's hoped all businesses will be able to return once the lockdown is fully lifted. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, South Africa's competition watchdog has now expanded a long-running rate rigging case to target other lenders, including some of the country's biggest banks. Now, the Competition Commission has since 2015 been seeking fines against 23 local and foreign banks. It alleges they colluded to coordinate activities when giving quotes to customers buying or selling the rand and the dollar. Those banks include Standard Bank, Nedbank and First Rand. The country's antitrust tribunal concluded last year that it had no powers to charge foreign banks, but it declined to throw the case out altogether, asking the Commission to submit a new charge sheet. The Commission says it has met this obligation and in the process added 5 new banks to the case, taking the total to 28. And still in South Africa, the producer price inflation for March was expected to have slowed to 3.5% year-on-year from 4.5% in February. Now, this data reflects the first week of the national lockdown. And here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola with more on those numbers.
The overall March PPI data came in below the projected consensus figure at 3.3%.
So that's quite a sharp sit down in producer price inflation. Unsurprising though, given the environment. If anything though, there's 3 levels of truth going on here. It's the lies, damned lies, and statistics. Because this number is backward looking, it doesn't yet have the full impact of the very sharp slowdown in the figures.
Ironically, the local manufacturing sector is normally the first to feel the negative effects of a downturn in PPI.
Companies in the broader manufacturing sector in particular, and also the metals and engineering sector specifically, are operating under increasingly difficult conditions. And the decreasing trend in the PPI prevents companies from improving on already tight margins.
The mining sector, on the other hand, had a very different experience.
Coupled, of course, with the exchange rate, because the exchange rate has been weakening, started to weaken quite dramatically in March. So that enhanced the dollar prices that went up, plus then the exchange rate weakening actually gave us a little bit of a windfall in mining.
Perhaps the standout feature of the March data is the fuel price, which makes up a big component of the basket of prices measured.
It makes up about 20% of the basket, and it shaved a large chunk off the inflation figure. That, of course, has got very little to do with domestic circumstances, but rather a consequence of the very big decline in oil prices in the earlier part of April into May.
South Africa may have escaped increased inflationary pressure when the April and May data is released because of the low fuel price.
At the time that the oil price has recovered somewhat, the rand has also recovered somewhat. So there's a bit of a seesaw going on in that big component.
The change to level 3 in the lockdown levels will also bode well for most sectors.
This will mean that they will operate under normal circumstances and robustly produce and sell their goods. So we are hopeful that this will have a positive impact on the numbers and will show in the numbers going forward.
One of the other big components in that basket of data is the food prices, but expectations of a really good maize crop mean that there's going to be lower inflationary pressure there. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's head to Zimbabwe now. The country has raised $20 million in treasury bill auctions. The funds will help the Southern African nation combat the spread of COVID-19. Now, even before the global health chaos hit, Zimbabwe was already grappling with its worst economic crisis. It had been marked by shortages of food, medicine, and foreign currency. Bouts of hyperinflation in the last decade disqualified Zimbabwe from borrowing from international lenders such as the World Bank and IMF. Now, Zimbabwe also has long-standing arrears with those lenders. As a result, the government has resorted to domestic borrowing and money printing in order to finance its budget deficit, pushing inflation in the country to 676%, and that was in March year-on-year. Now, in the rural Zimbabwean district of Wedza, a project aimed at leasing electric motorcycles to local communities has now been launched. The program is generating some income for poor women and easing the burden of looking after their families. CGTN's Daniela Pearson looks at how their lives are now improving as a result.
The three-wheeler, known as Hamba, is leased to women in Zimbabwe in groups of up to 5. They can now carry farm produce to distant markets, offer transport services to villagers, and use the motorcycle for domestic chores.
Women in the rural areas carry the burden of carrying firewood, going to fetch water to drink, and carrying school kids to the school. So as Mobility for Africa, we saw that we need to lessen the burden on women. So we needed to test with the women so that we can see if they can be able to do some productive work during the time by saving time and saving their income.
We used to carry firewood on our heads for very long distances of 2 kilometers. But now it's much easier as this tricycle has taken away that burden.
Users pay an equivalent of $15 a month to lease the Hamba as a group. It has a maximum range of 100 kilometers and costs about $1 to change the batteries charged at a solar-powered station.
The project is targeted to rural women and many other service providers. So we have noticed that it's not everyone who can afford to buy it. So we are going to sell it to those who can afford to buy it, but at the same time we will continue leasing, because those rural women, what should their future look like if we just take our Hambas and then start selling them?
Health workers in the area say many women give birth at home, while others walk 12 kilometers to the nearest clinic. Pamhidzi Mutunya ferries an average of 4 people a day and collects medication for patients.
This Hamba motorcycle has made it easier for me to ferry patients to and from the hospital. We now have fewer cases of pregnant women giving birth at home due to lack of transport to the clinic, as was the case before.
Mobility for Africa is in the second phase of the pilot project before it can go commercial. The Hamba is assembled in Harare with kits made in China. Once it starts selling, it will go for $1,500 per bike. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
Now, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari is backing the head of the African Development Bank, Akinwumi Adesina, in his re-election bid. That is despite allegations of improper conduct against Adesina. The AFDB president has been accused of abuse of office by a whistleblower at the bank. Allegations include favoritism in hiring. Now, Adesina denied those allegations. He was later cleared of wrongdoing in an internal investigation. But U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin signed a letter to the bank's board on May 22nd, rejecting the internal investigation. The United States, AFDB's second largest shareholder after Nigeria, is now demanding for a new independent investigation, saying it has reservations about the integrity of the bank's process. Now, the World Food Programme has sent direct cash transfers to about 150,000 vulnerable people in South Sudan's capital of Juba. The United Nations body says more than half of South Sudan's population of 11 million people now faces acute food shortages, a crisis made even more difficult by the ongoing COVID-19 chaos. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet with the details.
The effects of COVID-19 are worsening the food security situation in South Sudan. Non-essential businesses have been closed since March, and food prices are rising because very little is being imported. Truck drivers importing food are tested before being allowed into the country. The process takes days. Coupled with low oil prices, that has left the government running out of money. Civil servants have gone months without salaries. Many South Sudanese people are now unable to afford basic commodities. Some businesses are closing down.
Business is down because people are fearing no movement. Yeah, even for us here, we are down. Look at it. Nobody from the morning. We are sitting. no business.
The humanitarian situation in South Sudan was dire even before the emergence of the coronavirus. Flooding in most parts of the country in December last year washed away homes, crops and livestock. Now, most parts of the country are flooding again, and years of civil war have denied many farmers the opportunity to cultivate.
We have to keep supply lines moving. We have to keep humanitarian assistance taking place in order to ensure that countries like South Sudan can get through COVID-19 without making all of the challenges it already faces that much worse.
The WFP says it has given more than 2.6 million people 3 months of food assistance as part of its COVID-19 response. South Sudan's government estimates that 65% of the population lives below the poverty line. Impact of COVID-19 on the economy is making the already dire food security situation even worse. Many here who are already dependent on aid could need help for even longer. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
And in Somalia, a new solar power plant in the capital Mogadishu could quadruple the city's generation capacity and significantly slash power bills for residents. The proprietors of the company said the switch to solar, especially amongst businesses, will provide relief from huge bills from diesel-generated electricity. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro with that story.
The demand for solar power is growing in Africa. Companies are now stepping in to provide safe, clean and affordable energy solutions to fill the gap by allowing interested customers to get crucial power in a country with no national grid. Beko, Somalia's largest electricity supplier, has been producing 8 megawatts since March and is expected to increase to 100 megawatts by 2022. The plant cost $40 million to construct.
Currently, I can say we are not getting more than 15, 16 megawatt of solar, and I'm sure it needs more than 300 megawatt of solar, and people are, getting used to install solar power plants. Like Beko, we are the first company installed, the solar power plants, 8 megawatt, up to 100 megawatt we are going to, but every state, I should say, every, region, they are installing solar power plants right now.
Beko, which also transmits and distributes power to Benadir, Lower Shebele and Middle Shebele regions, already reduced the electricity cost to $0.36 per kilowatt hour from $0.49 per kilowatt hour.
Nowadays, the whole world, they are going to the green energy, and Somalia is one of the best places to install solar power plants. Why? Because we are getting more than 3,000 hours sunshine. In Europe, they might get in less than 1,000 hours, and still they are installing solar. But in here, we have more than 3,000 hours. So it's a very good chance for all Somalis to install solar power plants.
Currently, each major city is powered by private companies that largely rely on diesel generators. Mogadishu's total installed capacity is at 35 megawatts against a demand of 200 megawatts.
The usefulness of solar panels is that you invest one time and there is no running cost and limited maintenance. That is why there was a reduction in the price of electricity in Mogadishu after they were installed.
Beko's solar panels now supply power for 4 hours per day to its 300,000 customers.
I am very happy about the discounts we get year after year. I have stable electricity for 24 hours now that does not damage my air conditioners and freezers.
Officials say that at present 85% of Somalia's population has no access to electricity, with 60% of them living in remote villages. And this is just one nation in sub-Saharan Africa whose population of almost 600 million live without a solution to the present energy poverty. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
You are watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but still coming up on the show. Australia goes into recession for the first time in 3 decades. And e-commerce surges in the UAE amidst a lockdown.
No one again began holding guns. Machine guns from police forces towards the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
Thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Just about 1:30, let's recap today's top headlines. A French court has ordered Rwandan genocide suspect Felicien Kabuga to be handed over to a United Nations tribunal for trial. Now, his lawyers have opposed this, saying that he will not receive a fair trial at the tribunal, which is based in The Hague and in Tanzania. They also claim his health is too frail for him to be transferred to the African country. The 87-year-old was arrested in Paris in May, ending a manhunt that lasted more than 2 decades. He is accused of bankrolling and arming ethnic Hutu militias during a 100-day period in 1994. 800,000 people were killed. Now, rebels have killed at least 16 civilians in Northeast Democratic Republic of Congo. Local officials in Ituri province say the victims were killed in an overnight attack on Tuesday in the DRC's northeastern territory of Jugu. Now, the victims included 4 men, 7 women, and 5 children. Local officials have blamed the attack on members of the Cooperative for the Development of a Congo militia group, Codeco. And Lesotho's former First Lady, Messiah Thabane, has been arrested over the killing of her husband's ex-wife. This is after a Lesotho appeal court revoked her bail last week. Thabane is being charged with ordering the killing of Lipolelo Thabane. Lipolelo was shot dead near her home in the capital Maseru on June 2017. She was estranged from the Prime Minister Thomas Thabane at the time of the murder. Thabane recently resigned as a Prime Minister. And the warring parties in Libya have agreed to resume ceasefire talks. The UN mission to Libya says they will conduct the talks via video calls due to the coronavirus pandemic. The mission did not communicate when this will happen. The eastern-based Libyan National Army of Khalifa Haftar have been waging war, an offensive, since April 2019. Now, Haftar wants to topple the internationally recognized government of National Accord based in the capital, Tripoli. With the support of Turkey, GNA has driven his troops out of several areas. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Now, on the international front, the coronavirus pandemic has pushed Australia's economy into recession for the first time in almost 3 decades. While many businesses have waited weeks to welcome customers, they may have to wait a lot longer to make a profit. Here's CGTN's Greg Navarro with more.
The decision for people to head to the Forest Lodge Hotel, known to locals as the Flodge, on the first day pubs were able to welcome people inside, was an easy one.
I heard the news yesterday and they said pubs were opening tomorrow, and I thought, great, I'm going to come to the Flodge and enjoy a beer.
The process for owner Matthew Sen to get his Sydney-based business customer-ready in a COVID-19 economy has been more complicated and costly.
As from today, I've incurred a whole lot more cost because the whole venue's open. I've re-engaged my cleaners, which is great for the economy, and re-engaged my garbage service.
Sen remained open when many hospitality-based businesses closed at the start of the shutdown. The pub focused on takeaway meals and learned how to adapt to survive.
Look, tough. You know, Irene, my wife and I and Mick did a lot of hours in those first 2 weeks.
Signs of easing restrictions can be found across New South Wales.
It's pretty crazy being back out into society, and we're super excited to get to the zoo, aren't we, guys?
Measures implemented to slow the spread of the virus in Australia have been successful.
We've embarked on the next stage of our plan, and that is to reopen our economy.
In New South Wales, that's meant gradually increasing the number of people hospitality-based businesses can serve at one time. Some pub and restaurant owners say opening up to serve 50 people at one time still isn't worth it. Not when you take into account all of the costs that come with running a business, from paying staff to paying rent.
You can't make money out of 50 people when you open up your whole pub.
But since Sen figured out how to weather the lockdown and loss of revenue, he's optimistic about being able to keep the doors open while the country slowly reopens its economy. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
Well, let's shift focus now. Nissan, which operates the UK's largest car manufacturing plant, says its Sunderland-based facility will be unsustainable, and that's if the country leaves the European Union without a trade deal. The Japanese company says that the EU was the Sunderland's factory's biggest customer, adding that it will be difficult to maintain its commitment if there was no tariff-free EU access. This is not the first time that Nissan has pleaded with the UK and EU negotiators. It wants assurances that 70% of cars manufactured at Sunderland, which of course are sold in the EU, can avoid tariffs of 10% under the World Trade Organization rules. Now, Nissan has invested billions of pounds in the plant, which has about 7,000 workers.
We want to continue. We are committed. We have shown our commitment by launching the new Jew. We have shown our commitment by investing in the new press line for next Qashqai. We are doing everything which makes sense to the country, to our employees, to the economy of, to our customers in Europe and in UK. Having said that, if we are not getting the current tariffs, it's not our intention or not our intention. The business will not be sustainable. That's what everybody has to understand.
Meanwhile, Britain has offered Chinese tech giant Huawei a limited role in the country's 5G telecom networks. Conditions were set back in January, including a maximum share of 35% in the market. But a lot of changes have happened since then. From London, here's CGTN's Nawid Jabrakil examining some of the concerns of Huawei supporters and its opponents.
One issue that was put to Senator Cotton time and time again was what the UK does instead of Huawei, and that's a dilemma facing many of the countries considering whether or not to allow Huawei in their 5G networks, is the fact that at the moment there are only a few other alternative providers, and Huawei is far more cost effective than those in many cases, and indeed has technology that is far more advanced as well than the likes of Nokia, Samsung or Ericsson, Mr. Cotton said. But moving forward, this won't happen overnight, was something Mike Rogers said, the move away from Huawei, and there's pressure for the UK government to start to ease back from that 35% market share for Huawei, possibly with a date of 2023. The UK government expected to update the telecoms industry by the end of July on its latest review on the decision to work with Huawei. We can expect plenty of lobbying on both sides, I think, before then. Nawid Jabrakil, CGTN, London.
And moving on now, the Hong Kong SAR Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, has held talks with central government officials on the proposed national security law for the region. Now, she met with Chinese Vice Premier Han Zheng, who reiterated that the goal of the legislation is to protect national sovereignty and security for Hong Kong's stability and its prosperity. Now, Lam spoke with the media after their talks. She said the Hong Kong government backs the legislative efforts. She also addressed Washington's threat to revoke Hong Kong's special trading status, calling the move baseless. She called for respect from the U.S. side towards the legislation that is being drafted by Beijing. She also underlined the importance of their bilateral relations. This, of course, is Carrie Lam's third visit to the Chinese capital within the last 7 months, the first of which saw her in Beijing amid escalating protests in Hong Kong over another piece of legislation, the amendment to a fugitive bill. Now, the national security law has also triggered some rallies. On Wednesday, some activists have made appeals to Europe to oppose it. Lam addressed such concerns at the press conference earlier, where she spoke of the significance of one country to two systems principle in Hong Kong.
We are operating in accordance with the Basic Law. The Basic Law provides for one country, two systems. The important pillar in this one country, two systems is one country. Without one country, there is no two systems. So when the one country concept, the sovereignty issue, is now undermined by the events that we have seen in Hong Kong, this advocacy of independence and even violence verging on terrorist activities, the central government has no alternative but to take action. Hong Kong people's confidence lies in one country, two systems, and all the strengths and competitive advantages of Hong Kong. It does not lie in what individual foreign governments have to say about Hong Kong.
Meanwhile, the private IHS market survey showed that Hong Kong's business activity is improving as the coronavirus pandemic fades. The PMI reading for May came in at 43.9 compared to 36.9 in April. But some critics are saying a proposed national security law will get in the way of that recovery. CGTN asked the region's financial secretary his thoughts.
According to critics, that the new national security law would erode Hong Kong's autonomy and therefore undermine the business environment here. What's your response?
I do not agree. To the contrary, the national security law legislation in Hong Kong will help sustain this city's safety environment and return the city back to political and social stability. In the past half a year, when I engaged with foreign investors, and even recently, after the announcement of the legislation, when I talked to bankers here, private wealth management professionals here, the overall response, I must say, is positive, because people think that social stability and law and order are very important for an international financial center, and also very important for them as an investor.
President Donald Trump has threatened to cancel the special trade status of Hong Kong, right? What would such actions entail, and how does the Hong Kong government plan to handle this?
Actually, U.S. has very substantial business interests in Hong Kong. So I would urge them in contemplating any action against Hong Kong to evaluate not just the impact on Hong Kong, but also the impact on themselves. In terms of trade, U.S. has been registering successive surplus year over years with Hong Kong. In the past decade, the overall surplus to their favor is close to 300 billion Hong Kong dollar. And apart from trade, they have very substantial presence here in the financial services sector, in the professional services sector. I would say that the impact on Hong Kong is very minimal, because Hong Kong is basically a service economy. Manufacturing only accounts for about 1% of our GDP. And in fact, goods manufactured in Hong Kong and exporting to the US only accounts for 0.1% of our total export. So in fact, this change will not have any significant impact on our economy. That may perhaps stir up some investment sentiment. It is important for us to explain to the investing public what the national security legislation entails and its objective. My experience in the past week in talking to different stakeholders is that when they understand the objective of the legislation, they feel more easy. And although they are waiting for the details to be announced, but overall, they see the need to have this legislation for Hong Kong in order to return Hong Kong to a safety society with social stability.
Well, let's shift our focus now to China's economy. The country's auto sector enjoyed a rebound last month as it continues to bring the coronavirus pandemic under control. Now, estimates by the China Association of Automobile Manufacturers show that over 2 million cars were sold in May. That's up 3% from April and a near 12% increase year on year. Now, auto sales in the world's second biggest economy were hit hard by the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic in the beginning of the year. And even with the May rebound, analysts are still expecting sales to be off over 20% for the first 5 months of 2020. In the meantime, China Import and Export Fair is set to kick off in the southern city of Guangzhou on June 15th. Chinese foreign trade companies rely on such gatherings to promote their products, but the event has been moved online due to COVID-19. Here's a close look at how companies are adjusting to a virtual fair this year.
Small businesses in China are navigating unprecedented challenges amid the ongoing pandemic. Aside from brick-and-mortar stores, they are exploring new and creative ways to engage with customers. Some business owners are turning to live streaming e-commerce to help their companies stay afloat. Vego is a company known for making high-quality shower systems. Its owners spent 70 million yuan building new factories late last year while the business was booming. Then the coronavirus hit and everything came to a screeching halt.
Our new factories take up to 30,000 square meters. They are capable of turning out 300 to 400 million yuan in yearly revenue. But the unexpected pandemic means hard times lie ahead for us.
But Zhang will not give up without a fight. He decides to take full advantage of the upcoming China Import and Export Fair, which will go online for the very first time.
The fair is held in April and October every year. We meet with at least 3 groups of customers every day. The business was good. Now we are pinning our hope on live streaming to bring in orders.
Zhang also says that live streaming e-commerce will become the main channel to meet new clients and boost sales for quite some time, with the end of the COVID-19 crisis nowhere to be seen. As to how many orders the company can rake in during the trade fair, the businessman says there is no hesitation for them and that changing the way they usually do business to follow the trend is the only way forward. Lililu, CGTN.
Well, let's move to South Korea now, where the government has unveiled a $28.8 billion supplementary budget in order to help fight COVID-19. Now, the plan raises the total stimulus to roughly $222 billion for an economy facing its worst growth since the 1997-98 Asian financial crisis. Now, this is the third and largest installment of South Korea's emergency budget. The government has put in place support measures equivalent to about 14% of GDP in order to counter the economic fallout from the global health emergency. The latest budget aims to spend more on protecting jobs, developing a COVID-19 vaccine, as well as providing discount coupons to boost consumption. More loans will also be made to small and medium-sized businesses who have been hit hard by these slumping sales. Now, like many countries in the Middle East, the United Arab Emirates is suffering amid the financial implications of the coronavirus pandemic. Travel restrictions and falling foot traffic, coupled, of course, with low oil prices, have dented the country's economic prospects. While CGTN's Jacob Greaves now reports some firms have been faring better in the new reality.
These use only very small...
These home test kits are just part of NAPTA Health's attempts to change women's healthcare provision in the Middle East. The UAE-based firm are aiming to take female fertility treatments digital by combining home testing with app-based assessments. They have over 220,000 monthly users, and they say there's been an increase in interest amid COVID-19.
The 3,500 hospitals and clinics in the region or in the country who were at 30% occupancy anyway have seen their footfall drop off, and they're all desperately trying now to figure out how they can continue to support their population in their homes. So that mind shift is happening for us. We will save millions of dollars in the near future because we don't have to convince everybody that this hybrid model of care, combining digital and traditional healthcare, is a good idea.
NAPTA Health aren't alone in the digital sphere. Amid lockdown and travel restrictions, e-commerce in the UAE and broader Middle East has surged.
The main winners have been in those supplying the essential goods. So e-groceries have seen demand skyrocket. A lot of the e-grocery startups in the region reported revenue growth of more than 100%. So they've really seen the positive side of this, as well as health tech companies and education technology companies, those specialized in distance and online learning, they've really improved.
The question is how long this trend will last post-pandemic, especially in a country like the UAE, which has some fairly lofty ambitions. Dubai's stated goal is to be the e-commerce hub in the region, with hopes it will contribute around $3.2 billion to the local economy by 2023. But that might depend on how much they can capitalise on any short-term changes to consumer spending habits brought about by coronavirus restrictions. Experts suggest one boost to regional e-commerce might be cashless payments becoming more commonplace amid the pandemic. But broadly speaking, digitisation in the Middle East is still playing catch-up.
The truth of the matter is, in many cases, whether it's e-commerce, healthcare or education, digital adoption has been lagging in the region compared to the rest of the world. And now, given that new habits are being formed, it's very likely that there is going to be increased demand that has longer lasting impact than was previously the case.
But even if there's hope for online firms, they still face similar economic headwinds buffeting more traditional bricks and mortar businesses, with startups in general grappling with an uncertain future as investors become more cautious.
The UAE is very representative of the rest of the region, so we've seen $320 million worth of investment between January and April of UAE-based startups. That's up about 30% on last year, but the number of deals have gone down to about 35 deals year over year, down 25%. And I think that the trend is showing that the bets are on more established, larger entities that are able to develop in this crisis, as opposed to the early bets. And that's why the number of deals are down, as opposed to the amount of funding, which is up.
And Philip notes the true impact of the pandemic might only be known later in the year when more data is available. For digitally minded firms like NAPTA Health, the current shift in consumer habits could provide opportunity, but it by no means guarantees a clean bill of health for the region's long-term e-commerce prospects. Jacob Greaves, CGTN in the UAE.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at how commodity markets performed today. Oil prices were up today at some point, topping the $40 a barrel level for the first time since March. Prices, of course, have been supported by lower U.S. inventories, as well as expectations that OPEC Plus will keep oil output cuts in place, and, of course, signs of demand recovery from the coronavirus crisis. Meanwhile, gold prices traded steady today after snapping a 3-session winning streak the previous session. A rally in equity markets on the hope of more stimulus did offset some support from a weaker dollar today. Well, let's take a short break now, still coming up on the show. In Uganda, a student develops a ventilator as delayed supplies from the West threaten the fight against COVID-19.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN. See the difference.
Now, manufacturing a ventilator is difficult, especially during this for a low-cost ventilator to treat COVID-19 patients. The device is a much-needed innovation in the East African nation, as CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga now explores.
Fixing the gap in Uganda's health system, Alex Kamjisha is building a ventilator, a machine that could help save lives during and after the COVID-19 pandemic.
What compelled me is the situation that we are in right now, because COVID-19 has come for us. In Uganda, we already have it, and we realized that if we start making our own ventilators, it will be safe for us, because we shall not need to go to other foreign countries to buy them. We shall be able to make them on our own and help our patients.
Ventilators are designed to help patients with acute respiratory problems. With a shortage of ventilators in the country, innovations like this will likely close the gap and boost the capacity of health workers to save more lives. Health experts have welcomed the innovation.
We are in a time where we need local solutions, and any innovation that is coming from an institution of learning that is based in Uganda is highly welcome to supplement the need of infrastructure. And we are glad, and we would wish to see many come out.
Kamjisha's innovation comes at a time the country is registering a surge in COVID-19 cases. Uganda has so far recorded 507 cases with no death. Health workers are now demanding more ventilators.
The number of ventilators that we have in the hospital, the number of the monitors we have in the hospital are not enough if we had, for example, southern patients. So we call upon the Ministry of Health and the government at large that Murago Hospital and other hospitals in this country, the time is now to prepare so that should we have bigger numbers in the future, we should be able to manage them. I would also say that in Murago Hospital, we need like another extra 700 ventilators.
So far, 3 universities in Uganda have embarked on designing ventilators. It is hoped that as more initiatives like this come up, more lives could be saved. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Now, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand trading at its strongest in 11 weeks today against the US dollar. That, of course, as investor appetite for riskier assets did improve on prospects of a swift global economic rebound. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling also gaining some ground today. It was helped by inflows from agricultural exports and low dollar demand from merchandise importers. Well, that is it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.